Welcome, citizens of the City of Truth. Today for you we have another reading from the anthology The Great Tradition. Today's author is the Roman historian and orator Tacitus from his work A Dialogue on Oratory. I can think of no better introduction than to read what the book itself says of it. Written sometime after AD 101, A Dialogue on Oratory shows Tacitus's obvious debt to Cicero. The speaker in this short selection is Messala, who laments the decline of education in modern Rome and upholds the detail of liberal culture belonging to the broadly educated statesman. I hope you enjoy it. Everybody is aware that it is not for lack of votaries that eloquence and the other arts as well have fallen from their former high estate, but because of the laziness of our young men, the carelessness of parents, the ignorance of teachers, and the decay of the old-fashioned virtue. It was at Rome that this backsliding first began, but afterwards it permeated Italy, and now it is making its way abroad. You know provincial conditions, however, better than I do. I am going to speak of the capital and of our homegrown Roman vices, which catch on to us as soon as we are born, and increase with each successive stage of our development. But first I must say a word or two about the rigorous system which our forefathers followed in the matter of upbringing and training of their children. In the good old days, every man's son born in wedlock was brought up not in the chamber of some hireling nurse, but in his mother's lap and at her knee. And that mother could have no higher praise that she managed the house and gave herself to her children. Again, some elderly relative would be selected in order that to her, as a person who had been tried and never found wanting, might be entrusted the care of all the youthful scions of the same house. In the presence of such a one, no base word could be uttered without grave offense, and no wrong deed done. Religiously and with the utmost delicacy, she regulated not only the serious tasks of her youthful charges, but their recreations also and their games. It was in this spirit, we are told, that Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi, directed their upbringing, Aurelia that of Caesar, Adia of Augustus. Thus it was that these mothers trained their princely children. The object of this rigorous system was that the natural disposition of every child, while still sound at the core and untainted, not warped as yet by any vicious tendencies, might at once lay hold with heart and soul on virtuous accomplishments, and, whether its bent was towards the army, or the law, or the pursuit of eloquence, might make that its sole aim and its all-absorbing interest. Nowadays, on the other hand, our children are handed over at their birth to some silly little Greek serving maid with a male slave, who may be anyone to help her. Quite frequently the most worthless member of the whole establishment, incompetent for any serious service. It is from the foolish tittle-tattle of such persons that the children receive their earliest impressions, while their minds are still green and unformed, and there is not a soul in the whole house who cares a jot what he says or does in the presence of his baby master. Yes, and the parents themselves make no effort to train their little ones in goodness and self-control. They grow up in an atmosphere of laxity and pertness, in which they come gradually to lose all sense of shame, and all respect both for themselves and for other people. Again, there are the peculiar and characteristic vices of this metropolis of ours, taken on, as it seems to me, almost in the mother's womb. The passion for play actors, and the mania for gladiatorial shows and horse racing. And when the mind is engrossed in such occupations, what room is left over for higher pursuits? How few are to be found whose home talk runs to any other subjects than these? What else do we overhear our younger men talking about whenever we enter their lecture halls? And the teachers are just as bad. With them, too, such topics supply material for gossip with their classes more frequently than with any others. For it is not by strict administration of discipline, or by giving proof of their ability to teach that they get pupils together, but by pushing themselves into notice at morning calls and by the tricks of toadyism. I pass by the first rudiments of education, though even these are taken too lightly. It is in the reading of authors, in gaining a knowledge of the past, and in making acquaintance with things and persons and occasions, that too little solid work is done. Recourse is had instead to the so-called rhetoricians, as I mean to speak in the immediate sequel of the period at which this vocation first made its way to Rome, and of the small esteem in which it was held by our ancestors, I must avert to the system which we are told was followed by those orators, whose unremitting industry and daily preparation and continuous practice in every department of study are referred to in their own published works. You are of course familiar with Cicero's Brutus, and in the concluding portion of which treatise, the first part contains a review of the speakers of former days. He gives an account of his own first beginnings, his gradual progress, and what I may call his evolution as an orator. He tells us how he studied civil law with Quintus Mucius, and thoroughly absorbed philosophy in all its departments as a pupil of Philo the academic and Tacitus the Stoic. And not being satisfied with the teachers who had been accessible to him at Rome, he went to Greece, and traveled also through Asia Minor, in order to acquire a comprehensive training in every variety of knowledge. Hence it comes that in Cicero's works one may detect the fact that he was not lacking in a knowledge of mathematics, of music, of linguistics, in short, of any department of the higher learning. Yes, Cicero was quite at home in the subtleties of dialectic, in the practical lessons of ethical philosophy, in the changes and origins of natural phenomena. Yes, my good friends, that is the fact. It is only from a wealth of learning and a multitude of accomplishments, and a knowledge that is universal that his marvelous eloquence wells forth like a mighty stream. The orator's function and activity is not, as is the case with other pursuits, hemmed in all around within narrow boundaries. He only deserves the name who has the ability to speak on any and every topic with grace and distinction of style, in a manner fitted to win conviction, appropriately to the dignity of his subject matter, suitably to the case in hand, and with resulting gratification to his audience. This was fully understood by the men of former days. They were well aware that, in order to attain the end in view, the practice of declamation in the schools of rhetoric was not the essential matter. The training merely of tongue and voice in imaginary debates which had no point of contact with real life. No, for them, the one thing needful was to stock the mind with those accomplishments which deal with good and evil, virtue and vice, justice and injustice. It is this that forms the subject matter of oratory. Speaking broadly, in judicial oratory our argument turns upon fair dealing. In the oratory of debate, upon advantage. In eulogies, upon moral character, though these topics quite frequently overlap. Now it is impossible for any speaker to treat them with fullness, and variety, and elegance, unless he has made a study of human nature, of the meaning of goodness and the wickedness of vice, and unless he has learnt to appreciate the significance of what ranks neither on the side of virtue, nor on that of vice. This is the source from which other qualifications also are derived. The man who knows what anger is will be better able either to work on, or to mollify, the resentment of a judge, just as he who understands compassion, and the emotions by which it is aroused, will find it easier to move him to pity. If your orator has made himself familiar with these branches by study and practice, whether he has to address himself to a hostile or prejudiced or grudging audience, whether his hearers are ill-humored or apprehensive, he will feel their pulse. He will handle them in every case as their character requires. And he will give the right tone to what he has to say, keeping the various implements of his craft lying ready to hand for any and every purpose. There are some with whom a concise, succinct style carries the most conviction, one that makes the several lines of a proof yield a rapid conclusion. With such it will be an advantage to have paid attention to dialectic. Others are more taken with a smooth and steady flow of speech, drawn from the fountainhead of universal experience. In order to make an impression upon these, we shall borrow from the Peripatetics their stock arguments, suited and ready in advance for either side of any discussion. Combativeness will be the contribution of the academics, the sublimity that of Plato, and charm that of Xenophon. Nay, there will be nothing amiss in a speaker taking over even some of the excellent aphorisms of Epicurus and Metrodorus, and applying them as the case may demand. It is not a professional philosopher that we are delineating, nor a hanger-on of the Stoics, but a man who, while he ought to drink deeply at certain springs of knowledge, should also wet his lips at them all. That is the reason why the orators of former days made a point of acquiring a knowledge of civil law, while they received a tincture also too of literature and music and mathematics. In the cases that come one's way, what is essential in most instances, indeed almost invariably, is legal knowledge. But there are often others in which you are expected to be well versed, also in the subjects just mentioned. Do not let anyone argue in reply that it is enough for us to be coached in some straightforward and clearly defined issue in order to meet the case immediately before us. To begin with, the use we make of what belongs to ourselves is quite different from our use of what we take on loan. There is obviously a wide gulf between owning what we give out and borrowing it from others. In the next place, breadth of culture is an ornament that tells of itself even when one is not making a point of it. It comes prominently into view where you would least expect it. The fact is fully appreciated, and not only by the learned and scholarly portion of the audience, but also by the rank and file. They cheer the speaker from the start, protesting that he has been properly trained, that he has gone through all the points of good oratory, and that he is, in short, an orator in the true sense of the word. And such one cannot be, as I maintain, and never was any other than he who enters the lists of debate with all the equipment of a man of learning, like a warrior taking in the field in full armor. Our clever speakers of today, however, lose sight of this ideal to such an extent that one can detect in their pleadings the shameful and discreditable blemishes even of our everyday speech. They know nothing of statute law. They have no hold of the decrees of the Senate. They go out of their way to show contempt for the law of the Constitution. And as for the pursuit of philosophy and the sages' saws, they regard them with downright dismay. Eloquence by them is degraded, like a discrowned queen, to a few commonplaces and cramped conceits. She who in the days of yore reigned in the hearts of men as the mistress of all the arts, encircled by a brilliant retinue, is now curtailed and mutilated, shorn of all her state, all her distinction, I'd almost said all her freedom, and it is learnt like any vulgar handicraft. This, then, I take to be the first and foremost reason why we have degenerated to such an extent from the eloquence of the orators of old. If you want witnesses, what weightier evidence can I produce than Demosthenes among the Greeks, who is said to have been one of Plato's most enthusiastic students? Our own Cicero tells us too, I think in so many words, that anything he accomplished as an orator he owed not to the workshops of the rhetoricians, but to the spacious precincts of the academy. There are other reasons, important and weighty, which in all fairness to be unfolded by you, since I have now done my part, and have as usual run up against quite a number of people who will be sure to say, if my words have a chance to reach their ears, that it is only in order to cry up to my own pet vanities that I have been extolling a knowledge of law and philosophy as indispensable to the orator.